everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast about Lord of the Rings, the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. And I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Grant Thompson, just along for the ride.
I always laugh when you say that. And in this episode, we have a very, very special guest. I would like to introduce him as being the only proper noun person, Seastan, who became a common noun, Seastanigans, in the game. That's the only person that I know that's ever been transformed from a proper noun to a common noun. We have Chris Stanford on the line, all the way from California. Chris, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks for coming on. I know that schedules can be crazy.
Yeah.
So just for our audience, who I can't imagine anybody not knowing who you are, but tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and maybe what you do for the community.
Well, I'm a really avid player of the game. I've been playing since the core set came out. And since then, I've gotten really involved in the community. I'm a host of Cardboard of the Rings. I maintain a lot of the online resources for the game, such as Octagon and RingsDB. I have my own YouTube channel, and I'm the moderator of the Cardboard of the Rings Discord. So
just that, right?
Yeah.
And you probably don't do anything else. It's not like you have like a real life job or family responsibilities, right?
I do. Yes, I do have a private life as well. I'm a physics postdoc doing experimental dark matter research. I have a wife and a son who's just turned 2.
Hey.
Yeah, and between all that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah. And have you learned not to sleep yet? That's, I guess, the question, right?
Yeah, well, actually, he's a pretty good sleeper, so
okay.
Yeah, no complaints.
Well, be thankful for it because it'll all change in a few years.
Yeah.
Grant knows. Grant has 5 little ones. Well, maybe not so little ones roaming around, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, what drew you to the game, Chris?
Well, I've always been into games, board games, card games. I've just generally been had a lot of nerdy interests throughout my life. I know it's surprising that experimental physicist has these kinds of hobbies, but also been a huge Lord of the Rings fan ever since I saw the movies, and then read the books. I pretty much picked up any game, video, board game, card game that had the Lord of the Rings label on it, at least just to try. And I enjoy most of them. I tend to have a higher tolerance for shortcomings of a game if it has the Lord of the Rings label on it. But in this case, there were no shortcomings. It was just an amazing game from the beginning that just hooked me. So yeah, I've been playing it since.
But did you have a card game that kind of was a gateway drug for you, so to speak?
I'd never played Magic, actually. I kind of missed that whole boat. I think it's because when I was young and just getting into the point where I could learn a card game, Pokemon was taking over.
Right.
And so I got really into the Pokemon card game at that time.
Right.
And played that for a number of years, and then just never got into Magic.
Right.
So I don't have really the time to get into a competitive game at this point in my life. So
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I really loved Lord of the Rings, because to get a co-op card game was just floored me.
Yeah, it's I love the flexibility of it. Just being able to play whenever you have free time. You don't need to depend on another person. So
right. Yeah. Little known fact is when I go to school, I usually bring one of these filled with just a player deck and an encounter deck and some dice, and
nice.
I'll just just play away.
While he's meant to be teaching class, he'll sit and play a game while the class do the work.
That's what I would be doing too.
Right. I could sit here and talk to Chris all day long. If it's not about the game, I could talk to him about experimental dark matter research and science dorky stuff. But I think we should get into the game. And just like we do with all our guests, we asked Chris to pick a card. He could tell us beforehand or not tell us beforehand. He chose to tell us beforehand. And so, Chris, why don't you tell the listeners or the watchers which card you picked and go through the card for us?
Absolutely. So I'm not going to shock anyone who's really been following my interests or any of the decks that I build, but I chose the Hero Eurostore. He's a 10 threat lower hero. He's got 2 willpower, 2 attack, 2 defense, 4 hit points, and he's a Noldor. His ability is draw 3 additional cards at the beginning of the resource phase, and at the end of the round, discard all cards in your hand.
Oh man, hey Grant, I prepped for Brock Iron Fist. I was going to say Citadel Plate, but we already did that episode, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris, we'll let you have the floor for a little bit. What are your initial, or maybe, I don't know, I guess it came out in the Treachery of Rudar, so it's been out for 3 years. What's your 3-year impression of Eurostore?
Well, Eurostore is at this point my favorite hero in the whole card pool. I just absolutely love what his ability does. I can still remember the day that I was reading the preview article where this guy was spoiled, and just being blown away that they could change so much of fundamentally how the game gets played with just a single card. Just the thought of having to discard your hand at the end of every turn, and like how that can even functionally make sense, was like a lot to wrap my head around just reading it. And I still remember the first impression it had on me, and only since then he's proved to be such a powerful hero. Just being able to make completely different kinds of decks than were ever possible before. Really low cost curve, high burn rate on your cards. The fact that you're drawing what is essentially 4 per turn means you don't need any other card draw in your deck at all. You're just blazing through it so fast. Just the number of new combos that he opens up, you get such a strong start because your opening hand is going to have 10 cards in it. You can have these decks that just burst out of the gate, which is just amazing in this game where the first few rounds are so difficult. You have so many resources right at the beginning. So I could go on for a long time, but
well, it's interesting because I think you hit on one of the big things that at least I wanted to say when you talked about him, is that very rarely does a card come along that just blows up a player's playing style when you use it. I personally, this is a little foreshadowing for everybody, but I personally don't use Eurostore, and I don't use Eurostore decks, but the buddy that I play with uses an Eurostore deck, and he's now on the campaign to go through the whole game with an Eurostore deck, and he says that he had to change his whole mindset of how he went about playing the game and think about doing things differently. So I totally pick up on that vibe with the whole, draw 3 extra cards, but then get rid of all the cards at the end of the turn. What do you think, Grant?
Well, when Chris said that we'll be doing Error Store, I'd start to look at a few decks, pulled them off, started to play with them, and it was really interesting to play that sort of deck because I'd used the Ally version a few times, not massively, but made those unique duplicate cards worth something. And playing with this version of Error Store, it really, I found it worked on most of the quests I tried with. On others, it was like I'd draw me opening hand. It was like I've got so much I want to play, but I haven't got the resources to play it. But all in all, I find that for his stats, he's a well-rounded hero, and his ability is great because instead of getting like the top deck in each turn, you're actually getting a few cards. So as you say, you don't need that extra card draw. And you can either buff his willpower to make him an absolute quester, or you can buff his attack power with the either the Rivendell Blade or the Elven Spear, or buff his defense with the Cloak of Lorien and the Burning Brand. So he's well-rounded for his stats, and for only 10 threat, I don't see him being used in all my decks, but I can appreciate what he can do.
Well, I think here's so just so everybody knows, Chris did tell us which card he was picking before we came on air, and I was thinking, when there's a hero in the game like Aristor, I feel like people build Aristor decks. You know, when we talked about Heirloom the Fair, we didn't build a Heirloom deck, we built an Outlands deck. When we put Denethor, Boromir, Faramir, whatever into a deck, we don't build a Boromir deck, we build a Gondor deck, you know. But when people use Aristor, they use an Aristor deck. So it's like you have to, and this is where Chris is really a master at figuring out, is like you have to build a deck to take advantage of that 3-card draw and the discard to get the full effect out of him. And so, Chris, how do you do that? What do you do? You're new to the game, or you just got an Aristor. How do you take advantage of his card draw, or what are the couple of ways can you do it?
Right. Well, the thing I'll say is you're right. If you really want to maximize this guy, it helps to play into his ability, both the drawing aspect, like taking advantage of that, by filling your deck with cheap cards so that you can actually play all the cards you're drawing, because you're drawing 4 cards around, but you're only generating 3 resources around. So in order to actually play all those cards, you're going to need to have a low cost curve. It would also help if you had extra resource acceleration, like Steward of Gondor, or even cards like Captain's Wisdom or Gaining Strength or Wealth of Gondor that can turn cards into resources, just to get a better balance in your cost curve. And then, of course, the other way to get him to his full potential is to actually make use of the fact that at the end of the round you're going to have to discard your whole hand. So cards like Ally Glorfindel can be played from your discard pile. Lords of the Eldar, cards that depend on certain cards being on the top of your discard pile, like the Sailor of Loon. Cards like Elven Spear are great because if you can't play a card, you can just discard it for attack power. Cards like Protector of Lorien do the same. Obviously,
I was just going
to the Sea can be used to fuel the whole Noldor archetype of playing allies for cheap, because you're just essentially turning each card into a resource whenever you use it.
I was going to bring up the Protector of Lorien mechanic, not because Protector of Lorien is necessarily a phenomenal card, but this is where, and I think we had a show recently, Grant, where I talked about this, where I kind of compare this card game to poker because poker is more of a game of making the right decision based on information that you have. And so here's a decision that you have to make that's made easier by using Aristor, because Protector of Lorien, for example, and there's lots of cards that do this, but you discard cards to buff a character, and you're not going to have those cards at the end of your turn, so you might as well use these cards that you can discard and buff and get something out of them instead of getting something for nothing. Another way that you have to kind of take advantage of Aristor's ability.
Yeah. And then what I'd say from that point is that, so to maximize his ability, that's generally the strategy you want to follow. But I think some people would just stop at that point and consider that to be the extent of Aristor's power, essentially. Like he enables this kind of deck. But if you dig a little bit deeper and sort of get more comfortable with him and get more comfortable with discarding cards, you can realize there's another type of deck where he's just offering you card draw in a regular deck. And you do end up discarding frequently because you haven't adjusted your cost curve necessarily. But the amount of card draw you're getting means that your deck is actually way more consistent than it would be otherwise, or if you depended on a certain card to fuel your card draw for your deck. Since he starts in play, you're always going to have him. And it can be tough because discarding cards always hurts, but you have to think about it in terms of like, yes, I'm discarding this card that's in my hand, but in a deck with less card draw, I may have never even seen it. Like you can think of that card as just being on the bottom of your deck in any other kind of deck that doesn't draw through your whole deck. You never see those cards.
Right.
So having to draw them and then discard them isn't any worse than having never drawn into them in the first place. So once you kind of wrap your head around that, he becomes just an amazing hero all around, not just for Aristor type decks, but also in general use decks.
So you found a way to use Aristor to do exactly what you said, obviously, and to kind of just use his card draw to buff things in a non-standard Aristor deck, silver harp or whatever. What is it? Silver harp? Is that what it is? Or
Silver harp. I actually don't use that card very much,
right?
Because
I noticed.
Yeah, that saves a card from being discarded. But I guess I've overcome that sort of fear and just, it's discarded, it's fine. I'm drawing 4 more cards next round. It's going to be okay.
The other low-hanging fruit kind of for a traditional Aristor deck is the Will of the West, where you shuffle your discard pile back into your deck.
Yeah.
But as I was kind of studying up for Aristor mechanics, a lot of people don't even run that because they say, once I have all my cards out, I'm gonna win. It's a win versus win more situation, It
is, Oftentimes, once you've gone through your deck once, you've gotten maybe not all your deck and every card you wanted to be in play, but you've got enough that the only thing you're going to gain by going through your deck again is just winning more than you were going to win by. There are exceptions. I think when I run a deck that has Aristor and say also a very good tail, where whenever you play it, you're going to discard 5 more cards off your deck. Then I find you can churn through your deck a little too quick for comfort, and you may want to get through it a second time.
Don't you mean a very good whiff?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, most of the time I don't throw in the Will of the West. Yeah.
Right, and One of the
And you'll
other,
probably notice a lot of my decks that run Irrestore also run Leadership Denethor
right,
because
those
he's enough. Yeah,
the two extra resources that you need, that first starting hand becomes so pivotal in this deck to be able to, even if you can't get the mechanics up and running the first time, you need to at least get some of those important cards out.
yeah, exactly. He enables you to play that huge opening hand down, and also allows you to play Steward of Gondor on turn one, which is going to help you actually make the most use of the four new cards you're getting every round.
Right. Grant, you said you've been playing a little bit of Aristor lately. Away from his ability, what do you use him for? Do you use him for questing? Do you use him attack, defense? Because he's 2 across the board for his attributes. He's got 4 hit points, so he's a pretty hardy enemy, and he's really ripe for just about anything you want him to do. If you're not using him as an that Irrestore deck mod, which I don't know why you would want to use him if you're not using an Irrestore deck, but nonetheless, let's talk about his stats a little bit.
Yeah, like I said before, I've found that he's quite good with a Burning Brand, a Cloak of Lorien, the Protector of Lorien, a boost his defense or his willpower. Higher Light of Valinor on there, he can quest and defend. And if you've got access to tactics, high an Elven Spear on him, and he's attacking for up to 5. He can do pretty much everything. I've used all three. In all 3 senses: questing, defending, and attacking. He's very versatile, and I like him because he is such a versatile character. Those 2 stats across the board, he reminds us of Beravor, except he doesn't have to exhaust to use his ability, which is a bonus.
I think that's key for a lot of the heroes, to not be able to exhaust. That way they're still up for whatever you need them to do.
Yeah.
When you're running your decks, Chris, obviously you can't just see Stanigan's your life away, so what do you use Aristor for?
I generally am questing with him. Occasionally, he'll participate in combat, probably as the attacker, but that's only once I've gotten enough allies out to quest with enough willpower with just my allies that your store doesn't need to go. But definitely in the early game, he is questing and then taking archery or undefended attacks.
Yeah, I think that 4 hit points is probably
it saved me for sure.
Chris, what other heroes would you say work really well with Aristor, or what have you tried and hasn't worked with Aristor? Like, what are the pairings here?
Well, the heroes that I pair most often tend to be heroes that can capitalize on the excess of cards. So I already touched on Leadership Denethor with his extra resources and his ability to play Steward.
Right.
He's definitely my number 1 pairing. Like if you just look at all my decks that I've built, he's the most common hero besides Irrestore, of course.
The Steward of Noldor, right?
Yeah. Just in combination with the huge surplus of cards you get at the beginning, having those extra resources, and he's also the same sphere for, and he's got the correct trait for Captain's Wisdom,
right,
which gets you another 2 resources to start. It just makes him an incredibly great pair for your store. The next most frequent option is probably Arwen, possibly just because she's an amazing hero herself, but also she can turn all those extra cards into resources, one each turn, and that really helps you get a better balance between cards and resources if you need them. Yeah, I think those are definitely the 2 most likely to be paired with Irrestore. I guess other than that, they tend to be the third hero tends to be kind of like, what exactly is this Earstore deck doing? Is it like a Gondor deck? In which case, my next hero is probably like Leadership Boromir, or is it like a Baragon deck where I'm using the cost reduction on Tactics Baragon to play attachments for free on him, which works great with Eurostore. Basically, whatever the deck is kind of doing, that's generally what my third hero slot is. I'd like a Dwarf Swarm. It's probably Bane, or if,
well, all those decks
yeah.
that produce, I don't know, get rid of all the all the Sustanigans decks that are on RingsDB usually use dwarf storm, swarms, because the dwarf trait is so well developed and has all those crazy things from the Khazad-dûm expansion.
Yeah, there's some pretty crazy combos you can get with the dwarves, and we are not idle.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I call it the tome of atatatatata, but like where you get to pull the, like I can never pronounce Atanatar. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, any card that can get you cards back from your discard pile are ripe for abuse.
Right.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let's take it in a different direction here. What cards don't work with him? I feel like, I'm talking to the expert Eurostore guy. I feel like you've probably tried a lot of things. And Grant, if you know cards that you've tried that don't work with him, that's cool. Chime in. But what do you think? What doesn't work?
I mean, off the top of my head, probably heroes that you would say don't work well in general. I mean, Spirit Pippin's probably a poor pairing for Eurostore.
For anybody. I'm just kidding. Spirit Pippin does have a few a few things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Eurostore shuts off Spirit Pippin's abilities. So,
right.
Yeah, it's not a great combo there. But other than that, I mean, I'm trying to think of decks where I guess maybe a Rossiel deck he's not good with, because Rossiel decks, or any sort of victory display deck, doesn't necessarily have to have Rossiel in it, but they tend to be heavily event focused, and Eurostore is not so good with event focused decks, because events are like often in response to something happening, like the door is closed, or none return, or like all these victory display type cards that you're waiting for a certain trigger. Obviously, he's no good with that, because he's going to discard cards every round, and you're going to have to get lucky with the cards being in your hand when you want to play them. So
what's the quest where you have to pull cards off your deck and you have to like match the letter with the is it one of the Hobbits where you have to match the letter?
Caverns Dim, I think it is.
Yeah.
In that case, there's the riddle mechanic where it'll say, reveal the top card of your deck, and then discard a card from your hand with the matching cost and sphere, or like 3 cards from your hand with the matching type, like a bunch of different types of riddles.
That sounds like it just would be annoying with an Eurostore deck. I don't know what made me think of that. I was just thinking of all the different mechanics.
I mean, yeah, if you're looking for a quest specific thing that he doesn't work with, the number one would be Road to Isengard, because in that scenario, in the final stage, you just lose if you don't have any cards in your hand.
Right.
So
now
that's a tough one to get through with the Eurostore. You kind of have to think of something really clever, or just kill them off before you get to that stage.
Grant, let me ask you a question, because you know the lore, and I'm sure, Chris, you know the lore too, but Grant, is Eurostore a Fantasy Flight guy, or is he from the actual lore of the...
He's actually one of the courtiers in Elrond's council. He's one of the Noldor that advise, that speak with Elrond, and I believe that's who meets them in the Hobbit when they get to Rivendell.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on that last bit, but I know he's one of the courtiers in Rivendell.
Yeah, if you read the flavor text on the card,
Okay.
yeah, it's from Fellowship of the Ring.
Grant, I'm going to have to ask you, what do you think of the card art on Aristor?
I like it. I think it is very well designed. He's sitting at a table in Rivendell with a bunch of trees, reading a book. It's so... I think that might even be in one of the reading in one of the libraries in Rivendell, or it might be out in one of the gardens. But either way, it's a fantastic piece of artwork taken for nothing else. I'd like to see it blown up like they've done with the new limited edition cards, and seeing how that would have looked.
Well, what else do we have about?
Well, I think I mean, I could go on all night. So I know you guys want to keep a tight episode. So I'll just say, if he seems intimidating, he is at first, but just learn to accept the discard, and just cherish those 4 new cards you get every round.
If this was a COTR episode, I think we just found our title. Accept the discard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, Grant, do you think we should ring this guy?
Please.
Okay, so Chris, just so you know, we have a little ring system. It's highly scientific and completely arbitrary all at once. We ring on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card to rule them all, and 10 is the trash bin. Or, hey, you're a COTR guy, right? Right, bike spokes. That was a long time ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, Grant, we'll start with you. You've been surprisingly quiet this episode, so I'll give you first crack at Aristor.
Well, to be fair, it is just turned 6:10 in the morning here, so forgive me for being a little sleepy.
We forgive you. We forgive you.
In all honesty, I think I'm going to rate Aristor on what little I've played with him as a 4. I can see his potential. I need to play with him more and reevaluate at a later date. So 4 from me.
So, Chris, do you want to go, or do you want me to say what I have to say?
Hey, you can go.
Okay. I have a feeling I know where you may go, so I don't know. We'll see. But I have to say that the problem that I have with Aristor, and when I rate heroes, I look at like versatility. And I know, Chris, you're the master deck tech guy for Aristor decks. That said, I just don't like all the shenanigans that you have to use in order to make him like to max him out in terms of his ability. You have to really, really deck tech in order to get an Aristor deck up and running. And so I think while he is good stat-wise, I love the 4 hit points. I love that he's 2/2/2. He's got low threat for anybody that has watched the show. I'm a 10 cost or lower threat guy to start with. I hate starting with high threat. But I think that ability really limits his versatility, and you really need to have a really specific idea in mind in order to use him, and that really hurts him in my book. So I think he can tech around him, but I'm going to have to go with, only because Chris is here, I want to say an 8, but I'm going to go with a 7, because I just, it's a tricky thing, and he's not as versatile a hero, and you have to build a deck around him, so you're stuck using an Aristor deck. Okay, that sound you just heard was Chris picking himself up off the floor. Okay. So Chris, on a scale from 1 to 10, where are you going to rank him?
So I haven't had a whole lot of card ranking in this system to really, build up a good list of, who's better than who here. But no surprise, since I picked the card, I'm going to be ranking this guy quite highly. He's my favorite hero in the game, and so I'm not really sure whether or not that's enough to put him at a 1, because I don't necessarily think that he is the strongest and best card in the whole card pool. So I'm going to put him at a 2, because he actually is on my short list of most powerful heroes. He's my favorite hero, and he changes the game like no other hero does. And that, I think, gets him a lot of credit. And as someone whose favorite part of the game is building decks, he definitely makes the whole game more enjoyable for me. Yeah. So, 2.
Well, so there you have it. Grant with a 4, me with a 7, and Chris comes through with a 2. I actually thought you were going to go with a 1. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We loved having you on the show.
Yeah, I really loved being on here as well. And yeah, I'd be happy to be back another time. Thanks again for inviting me and letting me choose the card. I had a lot of fun talking about my favorite hero.
Yeah. And join us next time for Card Talk. Okay, everybody. See you later.